Testament, you go to the priest. Book of Haggai, they were told to go and ask the priest about if I touch a dead body, would I get unclean? Yes? So the priest was the person who used to give answers to those questions. In the earlier times, during the time of the temple or the tabernacle, there was something called Urim and Thummim. Urim and Thummim were kind of two stones. The background story says probably they were black and white stones, and they used to be in the, like we have our hoodies and we have a pouch. So this pouch was here, and these stones used to be inside. So to know the will of God, they used to put these two stones inside, and the high priest would have these stones in his hand, and God would order what stone comes out. So Urim and Thummim were two stones. Whether to do it or not, going by God's will, it was using those two stones. Now, when you come to book of Zechariah, we see it is through the priest. In the New Testament, a believer can directly ask God, right? When the veil was torn, you want to know something, you want to know God's will, you can directly ask God. So that barrier was taken off, right? That's why Peter writes and says in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9, he says, "But you're a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." By the way, this is the theme for our church anniversary in February next year. This is the theme verse. Brother Prabhakaran will be sharing the word based on this verse. So, talk to me directly. So, let's go back. So, these people, verse 7:3, they went to the Lord to check with the Lord by asking the priests of the house of the Lord Almighty and the prophets, "Should I mourn and fast in the 5th month as I have done for so many years?" We heard about fasting last Saturday. So, I think, we can learn some more things today. So these people came and said, "Can we fast in the 5th month as I have done for so many years?" Why did you get this question? The question came because they used to fast in different months for different reasons. This 5th month fasting was because of the tragedy that happened to Jerusalem when Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed the temple. So from that day on, they used to fast every 5th month because they wanted to remember the tragedy of the temple being burned down, the city burned down, and captivity. So this was the reason. But now the story is they have come back from Babylon. Now the temple construction has started. It was paused for some time, and now it is resumed. So they are saying, "Hey, I think we got the answer, isn't it?" Try to understand this. I think we got the answer. The temple is already being constructed, so can we stop our fasting? So as we listen to this, we need to apply this to our life also. Okay, I was fasting for something, I already got it. So should I continue fasting? Right? Usually the answer is what? No. So they're also just like us. I was fasting, I got the answer, so why should I fast now? So look at the answer. "Then the word of the Lord Almighty came to me, ask all the people of the land and the priests, when you fasted and mourned in the 5th month and the 7th month for the past 7 years, was it really for me that you fasted? And when you were eating and drinking, were you not just feasting for yourselves? Are these not the words of the Lord proclaimed through the earlier prophets, when Jerusalem and its surrounding towns were at rest and prosperous, and the Negev and the western hills were settled?" You know what God is saying here? Oh, you want to come and ask whether you should continue fasting or not? Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's ask this fundamental question. When you were fasting, did you really fast for me? When you switched to feasting, were you feasting for me? Now I want to ask a question. Fasting for the Lord, suppose, ideal situation, God is challenging and says, "Did you fast for me?" "Okay, Lord, there are people who fasted for you. Can we feast for God? Look at verse 6. I'll go back, okay? Let's pause here and look at this. When you were eating and drinking, were you not just feasting for yourselves? So my question is, feasting is my tummy, right? Feasting is your tummy. Now you're asking a question like, how can I feast for God? I can fast for God. Ideal situation, I can fast for God, but how can I feast for God? Right? Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 31. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 31. It says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. So I think, we are getting one notch higher in our spiritual life. We're getting some more sensitivity in what we are doing. That is, as a church, as a family, when we eat, something very, very powerful. When we eat, are we eating and drinking for the glory of God? Do we really think about that? Eating and drinking, can it be for the glory of God? When a believer grows more and more, in the early days of when you are born again, your sensitivity levels with God are high. Unfortunately, when you are growing, the sensitivity levels decrease. You get used to certain things. Yeah, that's also normal. That's okay, that's normal. Everybody's doing it, it doesn't matter. But when you come to spiritual maturity, our sensitivity must be growing and more and more. So today at least I am learning something new. Read this several times. I've read this 1 Corinthians 10:31 also. But in the context of what God is asking here, did you not feast for yourself? So I don't know about you, but I got an answer. Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, not only eating or drinking. Eating and drinking is basic for our living. But whatever you do it all for the glory of God. So if you narrow it down to the fundamentals, our eating and drinking must be for the glory of God. Let's go back. Zechariah 7:5 it says, when you fasted and mourned in the 5th and the 7th months for the past 70 years, hey, you fasted for 70 years. So would you not appreciate them? You would say 70 years you fasted. You're great. 70 years you fasted. Right? Every year, 5th month, on a particular day, they used to fast. 70 years. So, would you not appreciate them? But here, God is not appreciating them. Because He is asking, did you fast for me? Did you fast for me? Let's ask this question. When we fast, the question for fasting should not be how long or not when. The question for fasting should be, why are you doing it? Why are you fasting? God says you fasted for 70 years. I want to tell you the tragedy here. These people fasted for 70 years, and in just one stroke, God cut down their religion and their fasting of 70 years in one stroke. Don't you think so? 70 years fasting in one stroke, God said, waste. Why? Because you did the fasting for yourself. And this is what God says. This is exactly what you were doing before you went into captivity. You get the point? Look at verse 7. Are these not the words of the Lord proclaimed through the earlier prophets when Jerusalem and its surrounding towns were at rest and prosperous, and the Negev and the western foothills were settled? It means before Nebuchadnezzar came, what is your situation? You were also comfortable. Okay, during your comfortable days, what were my prophets telling you guys? Exactly same thing. Like what? You are fasting for yourself. Even before 70 years, if you did that, right? They fasted in the other months. 5th month was for Jerusalem. Now, 7th month they fasted. You'll find the list there. Even those days, I used to tell, don't fast for yourself or don't feast for yourself. I was giving you these warnings. You didn't take the warning. You went into captivity. You come back and still fellows asking the same question. You're fasting for yourself, feasting for yourself. Verse 8. And the word of the Lord came again to Zechariah. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the alien or the poor. In your hearts, do not think evil of each other. You know why is he saying this? This is the exact definition of fasting that God gave to these people in Isaiah chapter 58. In Isaiah, when you say Isaiah 58, it is definitely before the captivity. So what is the definition? Look at Isaiah chapter 58. Isaiah chapter 58, and let's read from verse 3, then you will understand. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen? Why have we humbled ourselves, and you have not noticed? Yet on the day of fasting, you do as you please, and exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife, in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Wow. This is powerful. You cannot do the fasting in your own style, which is ungodly way. There is fighting, there is strife, and you want God to hear your voice. See, when we fast, basically it is for what? For God to hear us, right? And God says, you didn't eat your food since 10 days. You are still requesting me. I won't listen. Why? What is happening on the side? You're fighting, you have envy, you have strife, you have jealousy. You know, all these things are happening. Look at verse 5. Is this the kind of fast I have chosen? Only a day for a man to humble himself? Is it only for borrowing one's head like a reed and for lying on sackcloth and ashes? Is this what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is this not the kind of fasting I have chosen? So God's definition is different. See? Fasting, man's definition is different, God's definition is different. What is God's definition? To loosen the chains of injustice, untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe him and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? God is saying, this is what I'm expecting from you. You don't do all this. And you want to bring in your religion and say, we are fasting, Lord, hear us from heaven. God says, but your heart is all full of wickedness. Your heart is full of selfishness. Your heart is full of indifference. So why would I listen to you? God says, you need to come into my definition. That's exactly what he's saying to these people. Look at verse 11, Zechariah 7:11. But they refused to pay attention, and stubbornly they turned their backs and stopped their ears. If you are reading King James Version, the word there used is not backs. The word used there is shoulder. Right? Yeah, shoulder, and stopped up their ears. Why shoulder? Yeah, what happens? See, you're standing, you're down, or something is not okay with you. Somebody puts a hand on your shoulder, right? Somebody puts a hand on your shoulder. What do you do? You jerk it off, right? When you jerk your shoulder off, what does it mean? You're arrogant. And also you stop your ears. You don't want to hear. That's what God's saying here. Look at verse 12. They made their hearts as hard as flint and would not listen to the law or to the words that the Lord Almighty had sent by his Spirit through the earlier prophets. So the Lord Almighty was very angry. He was very angry. You know, God keeps talking to us. God keeps yearning to spend time with us. God wants to continue to talk to us, okay? But what is certain people doing? Look at Jeremiah chapter 32 and verse 33. Some people, what they do is when God is speaking, and God is very grieved because of this. Why? Because in Jeremiah chapter 32 and verse 33, they turned their backs to me and not their faces. Though I taught them again and again, they would not listen or respond to discipline. So when you talk about Jeremiah, it is before the captivity. See, you're talking about earlier prophets. So of the earlier prophets, one of them definitely is Jeremiah. What is that? I spoke, but they turned their backs and not their faces. Though I taught them again and again, they would not listen or respond to discipline. So God is very grieved with these people. And then look at verse 13. When I called, they did not listen. So when they called, I would not listen. Not only that, verse 14. I scattered them with a whirlwind among all the nations where there were strangers. The land was left so desolate behind them that no one could come or go. This is how they made the pleasant land desolate. I want you to carefully look at the last line of this chapter. The last part of Zechariah 7. What does it say? This is how, right? Who scattered? Let me go back, okay? 14, first part. I scattered them with a whirlwind, right? I scattered them with a whirlwind. What is there in the last part? This is how, who made the land desolate? Yeah? See there. This is how they made the land desolate. They made the pleasant land desolate. God says, I scattered with the whirlwind, but ultimately who is the cause? You people have made this pleasant land desolate. Lord, you did that, right? Oh, so if you get into details, you will find out. Right? God says, I scattered. Oh, so blame goes on you. So God says, hold on. Do you know why I did that? Because you fellows, I kept sending the prophets, you never listened to me, and therefore I had to do it. So, how does it end? Chapter 7. You people made the land, pleasant land, desolate. Right? So, God says, I'm not happy with your fasting. I'm not happy with your fasting. What do we understand from chapter 7? Fasting for them was a ritual. Right? Ritual. Rituals don't have a meaning if the motive is not right. You get it? So when the heart is right, the ritual is right. When the heart is wrong, the ritual is wrong. But the rituals don't have a meaning if the heart is not right. If your heart is right, the ritual has a meaning. For example, you bring an animal to God. In the Old Testament, you offer sacrifice. Your heart is right with God. What happens? It accepts. Your heart is not right. You brought the animal, you paid the price, you brought the animal to the priest, and God says, I'm still not happy. There is a verse in Haggai, we'll see that next when we come to Haggai. It says, your sacrifices are a stench to me. Listen carefully. What is actually the sacrifice to God? A sweet, savoring smell. Like, when you offer sacrifice, it's a sweet savor. It's like an incense. But God says, it is nauseating smell. It is a stench to my nose. Really? That is all connected to what? Heart. Not the fat burning on the altar. The fat burning on the altar will become a sweet incense or a stench based on your heart. How is it that? I can't explain. But that is the truth. The motive, if it is not right, whatever we do, whatever rituals we do, whatever ministry we do, if the motive is not right, it doesn't stand good. So in chapter 7 we find if the heart is right, the ritual is right. If the heart is wrong, the ritual is wrong. Let's go to chapter 8. Again the word of the Lord. Again the word of the Lord Almighty came to me. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I am very jealous for Zion. I am burning with jealousy. In this one verse, you find the word jealous or jealousy twice. God says, I am a jealous God. Jealous God. Try to understand The jealousy of a man is different from the jealousy of God. The jealousy of God is that, my name has to be honored and you belong to me. Jealousy for a man is somebody else has something and then we feel bad about it that we don't have, and we want the other person to be hurt, or we think evil of the other person. That is our jealousy. God's jealousy is different. God's jealousy is to own us, right? So he says, I'm very jealous for Zion. I'm burning with jealousy. This is what the Lord says. I will return to Zion and dwell in Jerusalem. Then Jerusalem will be called the city of truth, and the mountain of the Lord Almighty will be called the holy mountain. This is the long range plan of God. I want you to understand. Look at the first person addressing. He says, I will return to Jerusalem. I will return to Jerusalem. So it is God who's saying, I will come. Right? I will come. Then he says, I will dwell in Jerusalem. There's a beautiful verse in Revelation chapter 21. And look at verse 3. Revelation 21 and verse 3. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. Right? God will live with his people. I don't know if you can really understand the depth of that. God will live with his people. If any of you read Telugu Bible, in the Telugu Bible, the word used, in English Bible, in the King James Version, the word used called tabernacled. God will tabernacle with them. If you are reading a Telugu Bible, the word used there is kapuramu undunu. You understand? So, God and his bride will dwell. Telugu it says kapuramu undunu, like a husband and wife. Right? That is the longing of God. And that is the ultimate long-range plan that God has for his people. Come back to 8:4. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Once again, the men and women of ripe old age will sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each with the cane in his hand because of his age. Can somebody tell me what this means? It will be a long life. Long life. Ripe old age. Now keep that verse there, and I want you to look at another verse. Look at Jeremiah chapter 9 and verse 21. Jeremiah chapter 9 and verse 21. Death has climbed in through our windows and has entered our fortresses. It has cut off the children from the streets and the young men from the public squares. So what does it mean? Compare it to verse 5 here. The city streets will be filled with boys and girls playing there. The city streets will be filled with boys and girls playing there. We're all going to play Saturday, right? So that atmosphere is different, right? When you're playing. Yesterday we practiced volleyball, throw ball. That atmosphere is very different. Encouraging one another, trying to be competitive, right? That emotions are different. God says that is how it will be. Just imagine children are playing and ripe old people are sitting by the tree and then with their canes and sitting and watching the kids there. And what do you think they're doing? They're talking there. Can you imagine that? God says what does it mean? I'm going to give you peace. I'm going to give you long life. I'm going to give you your gaiety. I'm going to give you your joy.